Thank you for watching. I watched a debate, and I have thoughts about it. I first watched it thinking, I'm not sure if I'm going to make a video about this, and then, about 10 or 15 minutes into it, I felt the need to make a video about this. The channel that put this up, as far as I can tell, agrees with Hugh Ross and thinks he is the bee's knees. They agree with him on things. The title of the YouTube video was a debate between Hugh Ross and Ken Ham. They weren't the only people there. Looked like it was on a TBN set, Trinity Broadcasting Network. Matt Couch, I think, is the name of the moderator. There was Ray Comfort, Hugh Ross, Sean McDowell, I think, the moderator, Hugh Ross, no, Ken Ham, Sean McDowell, the moderator, Hugh Ross, and Eric Hovind. Hello. Yeah, I knew it wasn't worth listening to. And some guy who I don't remember seeing before, who was a professor of Biola, I think it was. So, let's talk about this real quick. Hugh Ross talked about the concept of two books. The book that's God given us in the scriptures and the book of nature. Scientists are commanded, he said we're commanded to be scientists and theologians. Well, if you love God, there's some truth to that statement. If you love God with all your mind, that means you actually think about it. So we should think about it. I come to some different conclusions than Hugh Ross. He said the space-time theorem proves God, dark energy proves God, and the fact that this Earth was designed for human beings. I agree with him, this Earth was designed for human beings. Well, I think he means the whole universe was. Well, it is nice to see the stars out there. Let's see. But the whole universe, maybe that wasn't, not every little detail was for just this Earth. Dark energy. To the best of my understanding, dark energy has never ever been measured, actually witnessed. Dark energy was created to explain why the atheistic, cosmic evolutionary things were not happening at the expected rates. Ken Ham talked about how he's for biblical authority. He's worried about people leaving the church. Two-thirds, he quoted a statistic, 2/3 of people who grow up in churches don't stick with church when they're older. He pointed out that culture is invading the church, and Ken Ham made a good point that Hugh Ross doesn't accept all of the biblical stories as true. They're miraculous. The creation, he believes, was not so miraculously done, and definitely not done in a quick time that Ken Ham gets out of the Bible. But Ken Ham listed off some other miracles in the Bible that a Christian should believe if they're a Christian, and pointed out that Hugh Ross isn't trying to reinterpret those things, and a lot of the theistic evolutionists or old age Christian creationists are not trying to reinterpret those verses, and that's inconsistent of them. Let's see. So virgin birth, they don't try to reinterpret that. Let's see. The virgin birth. So the only one, the resurrection. The New Testament, and the New Testament, Jesus Christ, and some of the prophets and apostles. In the New Testament, when they have an opportunity to bring up things in the Old Testament, they quote it like it really happened. They don't, talk about it like it's a fairy tale or just a cute story, but not what really happened. Ken Ham brought up the question of how we define science, and he did not deny that. Ken Ham doesn't make the claim that you can't be a good scientist and an atheist. But there's different kinds of science. There's historical science, where you're looking into the past and we can't be so certain about things. And there's functional, what's the other word? Functional science. Observable science. Observed science, where we see things happening and that's how we get our technology. Our technological discoveries have absolutely nothing, zero to do with whether the Earth is 6,000 years old or 6 trillion years old. There's a big difference between, scientists get a rover to Mars and learn about it. There's a difference between getting a rover to Mars and the origin of Mars. Yep, so there's a difference between observed science and historical science. Hugh Ross, he's seen scientists come to faith by his explanation of things. I don't see how that's his case is convincing. He denounced the dichotomy. Ken Ham's dichotomy is not a false dichotomy. Hugh Ross was very wrong on this one. There is a dichotomy. There is a difference. And Ken Ham has got some quotes, if you watch his videos, from secular scientists who say the same exact thing. And astronomers engage in historical science, he says, because of his belief in the billions of years, the Big Bang and billions of years. So, and light takes billions of years to get here, according to his understanding, so we're looking at billions of years old stuff. Let's see. And astronomers are the best scientists because they can see back to billions of years. He says they can see to trillionths of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second from the cosmic creation event. And he's claiming that's direct observation. But God says, okay. The thing that got me really fired up and thinking, I've got to make a video. After their opening statements, Matt Crouch, the moderator, gave a short summary of what they both were trying to say and what their positions were. And he gave his summary of Hugh Ross's position was, you're trying to show the atheist that there's a part of the formula they're missing. And no, I don't see Hugh Ross as doing that. The atheists have a complete formula. They have 2 + 2 + 10 × 6. There's no variable in their formula, or whatever the metaphorical formula is we want to come up with. There's no X, Y, A, B, C. There's no variable there. They have all the numbers, and they have the answer. I don't think it's a good description to describe what Hugh Ross is doing as him saying, there's a variable in there you're not taking into account. There's an X. X might be the most common variable used in algebra, so that's why I'm saying X. There's this variable. No, they've got a complete formula. We don't need to try to show them where their formula is missing something. It isn't. The whole formula is bad, but it's not missing something. They've got a complete formula. Ken Ham pointed out that the heart's deceitful and we're all sinners. So we should make the Bible, according to his understanding, higher, give it more weight than whatever any human comes up with. Ken Ham pointed out the Bible, and according to the biblical creation account, the earth came before the sun, and the earth came out of water. And Hugh Ross made it look like he doesn't read the Bible. Where? Well, Hugh Ross, he sees creation accounts all over the Bible where there are none. So that's where his problem is. It's in Genesis. Ken Ham does give an accurate quoting of Genesis. Hugh Ross claimed that Ken Ham has the wrong perspective, that God hovered over the water, and that's part of the creation event, and Hugh Ross pulls a lot of meaning out of that one verse that I don't think is appropriate or accurate. When the Spirit of God hovered over the water, because the Hebrew word, if you watch Hugh Ross speak a lot, you're going to hear him say the Hebrew word means this and that. He falsely claimed that Job 38 and 39 are creation accounts. No, they praise God for creating, but they're not like telling you how it happened. They're poetic. Hugh Ross, Ken Ham pointed out that Job's not a creation account. Genesis is. Hugh Ross said it's a text by creation. Ken Ham said, but it's not chronological. Hugh Ross claimed he reads the Bible literally and consistently, and everything's a creation text. He said there's in Proverbs 8 and Psalm 104 also creation text. And Ken Ham pointed out that Genesis 1 through 9 is a historical narrative format. Psalms are poetry. So if one of them is, if they're different, then the Psalms is going to be more likely the poetic one. It's not giving us precise details. That's the point he was getting at there. Good quote. Ken Ham talked about how the foundation of the whole biblical story is God creating the earth. And it's a good point. And then the moderator asked Dr. Bloom. Bloom was the one I don't remember seeing before on the Edge to moderate. He said there's different interpretations. Of course, the original Bible was given in Hebrew or Aramaic, or the Old Testament at least. Yep, and they're both... Yep, here Ken Ham went through a bigger list than he did earlier of miracles in the Bible that a lot of people like Hugh Ross do not question. But why don't they question them? Why do they believe those, but they don't believe the miracles in Genesis 1 through 11? So the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the virgin birth, the Red Sea crossing, Jonah swallowed by a whale. Let's see, but Genesis, it's okay to question according to those people. He made 2 points. Baptism views differ. Yeah, so Ken Ham said people disagree about baptism, but they shouldn't argue about Genesis being scripture. Let's see. Yeah. Don't trust the book of nature because it's based on human interpretation. That's a good point. And science changes. Scientists say different things over the hundreds of years and thousands of years of the earth, so they might say something different next 100 years. He went through a quick survey of whether they're young or old earth creationists. Ray Comfort, young. Eric Hovind, young. Dr. Bloom, in the middle. Sean McDowell, old. Hugh Ross quoted the creeds, which are not in the Bible, and are not just taking quotes from the Bible. And the creeds don't say anything about the creation. He thought that was a really strong point. I don't see how that's a point about anything. Ken Ham pointed out that the creeds were written by fallible man. And the creeds had different goals, wrote about different issues in creation. That was not in dispute at the time, I guess. Well, because those creeds were written by fallible man, I would also add they were not written by prophets of God. So, while a true prophet of God is still a sinner, it's a false doctrine that somebody being a prophet of God is absolutely perfect and sinless. God still can use an imperfect person to get a message to us. But the writers of the creeds were not that. Hugh Ross claims that he has always been reading the Bible and seeing an old earth. When he was 17 and he first read the Bible, he saw an old earth, and Hugh Ross demanded to be shown where that is. And Ken Ham demanded to be shown where it is. Hugh Ross did not show it. Hugh Ross claims that at the beginning of space and time is in the Bible. It isn't, but he says it's there. Yom has 4 different definitions. Yom is a Hebrew word translated day in the first chapter of Genesis. Ken Ham pointed out that there are rules that we can use to figure out what the meaning of Yom is, what the meaning of day is. He asked how long did they walk around Jericho when the Bible says it was 7 days. Hugh Ross claimed that in the book of Hosea there were numbered days. I looked that up, and thanks, Hugh, for getting me to read my favorite book in the Old Testament again. That was great. But the context is not the same as in Genesis, where it talks about numbers of days there. The Hosea, when it talks about days and numbers of days, is being poetic and prophetic, and not giving a description of something that happened in the past. Alright, Hugh Ross claimed that the hills look old. How do they look old, though? He didn't make a good point there, but even if they're older than a human being, thousands of years is not millions of years. Let's see, Ken Ham pointed out about the Hosea point, prophetic sense. So, yeah, it was prophetic there in Hosea. The ancient hills. Okay, apparently it has the words ancient and hills somewhere in the scriptures. Ken Ham pointed out it doesn't mean that they're billions of years old. Yeah, to somebody who only lives 100 and something years, something that's 1,000 years old is ancient. Kids joke about their parents being ancient or their grandparents, being ancient. And that's people that are 100 years old. So, ancient could just mean thousands of years old. It doesn't have to mean millions of years old. Ken Ham asked if there was cancel in the fossil record before sin and thorns, and Hugh Ross did not give a good answer to that question. He didn't really take that question on and give us a clear answer as to why a good creation would have the cancers that we see in the fossil record. He claimed that there's 2 creations, 2 creation events, creation stories. All of the religions are trying to get us back to Eden, but God wants to make a new heaven and a new earth, and this is the best creation to eliminate evil stuff. I am trying to give myself a headache today. I read the Quran, and now I'm remembering what Hugh Ross said. Alright, I would ask Hugh Ross, but what about... He says that all the religions are trying to get us back to Eden. What does he expect the new heaven and new earth to be like? Isn't that what Christians are looking forward to, is a recreation of something good? I'm not aware of any religion that thinks there is this garden still somewhere in the universe that we're going to go back to that's the same garden. But how is this creation the good one to eliminate evil? That doesn't make any sense to me. And we eliminate evil? Hugh Ross makes it sound like we eliminate evil. So God doesn't do it, but we do it? But how do we eliminate evil here? That makes no sense to me. Ken Ham asked where evil is from. Hugh Ross, let's see, and evil and sin from. Hugh Ross quoted Romans 5:12. All men are fallen. Yeah, but that doesn't show... Hugh Ross said the laws of physics give us cancer. Ken Ham pointed out that all the suffering in the world is because the world is fallen, and that is Adam and Eve's taking of the fruit that got that started. And Hugh Ross accused Hugh Ross's view of all those negative things being God's fault. Hugh Ross says God brought death to his own son and that death is a gift. And why do people not want to die more? That doesn't make any sense. Ken Ham pointed out the Bible put sin and death together, and then Hugh Ross, he says, put time and death together. Eric Hovind made a comparison about how you meet the queen. He made a parable supposing you met the queen, and he claims he met the queen, and he describes somebody different than the queen. And he feels like Hugh Ross is describing a different God, the same way the person in this parable is describing somebody who's not the Queen of England. Okay, Hugh Ross says, what about the seventh day? Because the seventh day in Genesis doesn't have an evening and a morning like the other days. I find that to be a weak argument. He claimed there's speciation in the fossil record before man. So Hugh Ross is believing all the billions of years all the atheists are saying. He is believing the evolutionary story, except that God made it. He's not a theistic evolutionist. There is a difference between what Hugh Ross believes and a theistic evolutionist. But there's not speciation before man. There's a bunch of bones in the ground and a lot of interpretation, but it's not been proven that was speciation before man. Eric Hovind pointed out that fossils don't have things, have a date stamped on them. Whatever somebody says about the fossil is their interpretation, unless they are saying it was found in the dirt in this or that country or state. Ken Ham still has a number, no rule. Yeah, Ken Ham pointed out that in Genesis the days are numbered. First day, second day, third day, and it was the fourth day. Hugh Ross has no rule. Claims that that's not a rule for interpreting, or it's an illegitimate rule to try to figure out what day means. Hugh Ross claimed because Leviticus has the agricultural lands take a Sabbath or take a break. According to the law of Moses, the Israelites were supposed to take a break from farming land once every 7 years, and then once every 50 years give the land a rest. But I don't see how that proves that a day doesn't mean a day in Genesis 1. He made an analogy with Exodus 20, and he claimed Leviticus 23 and 25 are a problem. Sean McDowell said that both sides should not try to force something into the Bible. Pointed out about sunrise and sunset. Ken Ham pointed out there's a difference between Joshua talking about sunrise and sunset. But Joshua was there when the sun was rising and setting, so it looked like, from Joshua's perspective. But when God gives us a creation account, it's God looking outside and telling us not from a limited man's perspective. Let's see, so Ken Ham accused Sean McDowell of being naive. I think that's why I wrote the word naive there. And, okay, Hugh Ross said we're long day. Some of the long days. Hugh Ross says we're still in day 7. That's his understanding of Genesis 1 is we're still in day 7. Long day. Adam and Eve and generation. Okay. So one of Hugh Ross's arguments for the long day is he described all the stuff in Genesis 2 that we see Adam going through, and he doesn't see how that could happen quickly. I do. I see how that could happen quickly. Let's see, Genesis 2, there was a lot of time between Adam and Eve. So he claims there's different Hebrew words, and the Hebrew word for a soulish animal. When Adam gave names to the animal, he was only naming the farm animals, basically, the soulish animals. Why does he say that? I don't understand how Hugh Ross comes to the conclusion that some animals have a spirit and some don't. They all have a spirit. Just because some animals are less helpful to humans or even harmful to humans does not mean they don't have a spirit. But how could animals be named quickly? Well, one, if you're naming biblical kinds, and not what we now have as modern species, and if there was less speciation, there would be less kinds of animals or less species to name. But if God's got them all lined up, how quickly would it take you to just go through a encyclopedia of animals and say the names of the animals? You could probably get through it pretty quickly. So if God had all the animals lined up, it could happen quickly. And it does not say in the Bible that Adam spent many years, hours, days, months feeling lonely. It does not say that. It says God knew Adam was lacking, not that Adam was bored out of his mind and lonely for years or even days. And one of the other people pointed out, Hugh Ross pointed out that that animals couldn't fulfill Adam because God knew it, and God's the one that came to that conclusion. So you don't need a long time because of that. Ken Ham pointed out in Matthew 19, when Jesus talked about marriage, he quoted Genesis 2:24. And Genesis 1 is 6 days. Okay, there is some problem for people who believe the Bible that they have to come up with some way to understand or explain Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. There are different stories there. Contradictory stories. Does man come first or the animals? They switch order in the two different stories. The way Ken Ham deals with that, Genesis 1 is the 6 days. Genesis 2 gives you details about day 6. 10 overview. He gave an example about how chapter 10 of the Bible of Genesis gives the generations. It tells us who Noah's children were. Then Genesis 11 gets you to the Tower of Babel and the scattering of the people. Overview, detail, or how. Eric Hovind quoted Genesis. The moderator told him to stay on the subject. Ken Ham warned that Paul. Which one was Paul? Paul, the Bible writer, New Testament writer, warned that that the devil was going to use the same argument against us that he used against Eve. I don't see how that's in there. He denounced millions of years, Big Bang, evolution. Ken Ham claimed that the gospel is based on real history, and that the Old Testament is too. I agree with that. Hugh Ross claimed he's got the best way to prove the atheist wrong, and then everyone should, when he proves them wrong, agree with his interpretation of the Bible. And does Hugh Ross's Bible have that New Testament verse that says we walk by faith, or has he cut that out? I wonder, because he's not acting like or talking here like he walks by faith. He's got everything down pat and proven scientifically. So if we prove he's not trying to get us to walk by faith. I don't believe his prediction is going to be true. Hugh Ross claims that if we go to the moon, we will find Earth's earliest fossils that have been destroyed over time on this Earth, and that would prove. It wouldn't prove. They're not going to find it there. It wouldn't prove it. Life on Earth didn't get scattered all over like he's saying it. That makes no sense. And to me, humans are supposed to end evil and suffering. I think we need God for that. I mean, we should do our part here, what we can for people here, but God's the one that is going to do that when he creates a new heaven and a new earth. I'm confused how Hugh Ross doesn't think that God making the new heaven and new earth will get rid of suffering. And Hugh Ross confuses me. Ken Ham asked about moon fossils, what it means. Hugh Ross said he believes meteors struck the Earth when the planets were forming. Well, Hugh Ross said the planets were forming on day 3, so there was no life yet. But then Hugh Ross talked about his understanding. Since the same word is used to describe God hovering over the ocean, that is used to describe birds sitting on a nest, and life comes from the nest, and they're making life, then that means God was making life on day 1 when it says he was hovering over the waters, or the Spirit of God was over the deep. I find that unconvincing. Eric said, Eric Hovind, we can have a 24-hour day without the sun because when it's rotated around one time, that's a day. Let's see, so there's no contradiction in Eric and Ken's literal interpretation of Genesis. Hugh claimed that darkness is caused by clouds, and the darkness, we read in Genesis 1, is from clouds, but the sun was already there. Hugh Ross, Ken Ham, same initials, Kent Hovind, Ken Ham pointed out that the verses in Job that Hugh Ross was pointing to are there to humble Job, because Job was feeling tempted to rebel against God. He was complaining to God. He was needing some explanation. Hugh Ross claims that the Trinity's in Genesis. I don't see it. Well, I don't see it the way he does. Okay. He talked about he believes in a worldwide flood and not a global flood. Hugh Ross swears, and it's certain that it's in the Bible, but it's not there, that Adam and Eve and their descendants were not spreading out over the earth, and that's why God caused the worldwide flood to kill off all the humans, but didn't cover the whole globe. And he claims that in Genesis 11, the same wording is used to describe the pre-flood and the post-flood, and that means they were all in one place when they're scattered at the Tower of Babel, and all in one place before that. I find that argument extremely unconvincing. Yes, so all in one place. It didn't have to be all in one place. And Eric Hovind, post-flood. Hugh Ross claimed the same commandment was given to Adam and Noah. And that proves his interpretation, too, that it was a local, regional flood, that God couldn't have told Noah to just walk over the mountain. Makes no sense. Doesn't match up with the story in the Bible. Hugh Ross claimed he should ask the audience. Ken Ham claimed he should ask the audience if they see what Hugh Ross is claiming in the Bible. Hugh Ross claimed there's creation accounts where there are none, where it's praising the Creator but not giving an account. Hugh Ross made some deal about a Greek word for something, and if it was, if the flood was not local, they should have used a different Greek word to describe it. I found that to be a weak argument. Ken Ham pointed out that the reason Hugh Ross needs the flood to be local is so he can have millions of years. Hugh Ross claimed it's in the text. No, it isn't. It's not in the text. Hugh Ross is doing some mental gymnastics when he gets a local flood out of a text that killed everyone on the earth and covered all of the high mountains. Hugh Ross, millions of years, yeah. So Ken Ham, claimed it was presupposition. Alrighty. So, yeah. Yeah. So, thank you for watching my summary of this video. I don't agree 100% with any of those people on that stage or that video, But Hugh Ross, I think, did a terrible job of explaining things. Hugh Ross forced his opinion on the Bible where it's not in there and then claimed it was clearly in there. Ken Ham, I don't recommend you go to him for your biblical interpretation because he will teach you a different gospel than Jesus' gospel. But Ken Ham, I think, exhibits more of a reading of what the book actually says, whereas Hugh Ross is... Alright. Thank you for watching. You have a good day.